The atmosphere in the command center was thick with tension. The alien ships, massive and imposing, loomed over Earth's orbit. The Arvok had declared war, a challenge to the planet they once believed had faded into obscurity. For years they had laughed at Earth's silence, convinced that humanity was a relic lost to time. But now, as their ships arrived, a cold dread swept over them. They had awakened a force they could never understand. Inside the control room, Commander Dahlia Carter stood by the console, her hands steady as she observed the incoming signals. The alien ships had crossed the threshold into Earth's solar system, their presence undeniable, their intentions clear. They had come for war. But Carter had other plans. "Status report!" she barked, her voice calm, but laced with the unmistakable authority of someone who had faced impossible odds before. "All systems online, Commander," Lieutenant Ryan's voice was firm. "Protocol Omega is ready for activation. The fleet is in position, but we're going to need every ounce of power to launch the counteroffensive. The aliens are massive. They're not playing by our rules." Carter nodded, her mind calculating the next move. The Arvok had underestimated humanity for the last time. She turned to the tactical screen, where a holographic map of the solar system shimmered in mid-air. Earth was small on the display, surrounded by the advancing alien armada. Carter's eyes scanned the map, her gaze unflinching. "They think they're the ones who control this war," she muttered. "They think they've got the upper hand. They're wrong." She moved toward the main console, where the central AI was waiting. "Activate Protocol Omega." The AI's voice resonated in the chamber. "Protocol Omega initialized. All systems online. Humanity's last line of defense is now active." Outside, in the cold depths of space, a ripple of energy spread out from Earth. It wasn't a traditional weapon, not a missile or a laser. No, this was something far more subtle, a signal, a beacon, a message, both literal and metaphorical. The ships of the Arvok began to feel it, their systems reacting to the change in the cosmic fabric around them. It was as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Inside the command center, Carter could feel the shift. There was no panic, no fear, just a cold, calculated certainty. The moment they had been waiting for had arrived. Humanity would not be forgotten. Earth would not bow to anyone. "Targeting systems locked," Ryan said, his voice a little quieter than before. "The alien fleet is about to enter firing range. They're close." The screen flickered, and the holographic display shifted again. The alien ships were massive, their forms angular and intimidating, each one a monument to their creator's power. But Carter's eyes were fixed on the one ship that led the charge. It was the flagship, the heart of the Arvok fleet. If it fell, the rest would follow. "Fire," she commanded. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a sudden surge of energy filled the room, and the sound of an explosion, not from a weapon, but from the atmosphere itself, vibrated through the walls. The flagship of the Arvok fleet shuddered, its massive form shaking as if it were an insect being crushed. The crew aboard the ship had no time to react. The shock wave sent ripples through space, a wave of force that turned the alien ships toward Earth. The humans had activated the first phase of their ultimate defense, an electromagnetic pulse so powerful that it disabled the alien fleet systems with a single strike. It was no ordinary pulse. This was Protocol Omega, an ancient, forgotten technology that had been designed for a moment just like this. Carter's lips curled into a faint smile as she watched the alien ships falter. They had come for war, expecting an easy victory. Instead, they were now facing the wrath of a humanity they had long written off. "Target the flagship," Carter ordered. Ryan hesitated, a look of disbelief crossing his face. "Commander, they're already destabilizing. They've lost their shield integrity." "I said, target the flagship," Carter repeated, her tone unyielding. As the order was carried out, The final phase of Protocol Omega began. A series of satellites, hidden deep in Earth's orbit, activated. Their focus was one thing and one thing only: the destruction of the Arvok flagship. A series of pulses, each more intense than the last, converged on the ship. The flagship's systems, already compromised by the pulse, couldn't withstand the assault. Its hull cracked, its engines exploded, and the ship collapsed in on itself. For the Arvok, it was over in an instant. Their largest ship, the one that had led their attack, was no more than a shattered husk drifting through the void. The remaining fleet, once so confident in their superiority, was left scrambling for survival. They were powerless, their technology obsolete against the fury of Earth's hidden weaponry. As the last remnants of the flagship burned up in the atmosphere, Carter's voice cut through the silence. And that was before Earth even responded. Ryan looked at her, disbelief still etched on his face. How did you know this would work? Carter's gaze never wavered from the screen. Because we never stopped fighting. Even when they thought we were silent, we were preparing for this. The alien fleet, now crippled and disorganized, began to retreat. Their arrogance had cost them dearly, and they had learned too late that Earth was not the helpless world they had believed it to be. The humans had activated Protocol Omega, and with it they had crushed the alien hopes of easy victory. Carter turned away from the screen, a single thought echoing in her mind. The war was far from over, but Earth had made its point. The Arvok would never forget the cost of underestimating humanity again. The Arvok fleet, though shaken by Earth's surprising retaliation, was not entirely broken. The remnants of their forces began to regroup, their desperation mounting with each passing second. The flagship's destruction had left a massive hole in their ranks, but they still held the power of numbers. The aliens' pride, however, had been shattered. They had underestimated the humans, and now they were learning the cost of such arrogance. Inside Earth's command center, Commander Dahlia Carter stood motionless, her gaze fixed on the tactical display. The pulse from Protocol Omega had been effective, but the Arvok were resilient. Their remaining ships were forming a defensive perimeter, preparing to launch a counterattack. Carter's mind raced, calculating the next phase of the battle. One move too soon, and they would lose everything they had gained. "Report," Carter said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "Sir, the Arvok are reorienting," Ryan said, his voice tight. "Their remaining fleet is positioning itself for a strike. They're using their damaged ships as decoys to create a false sense of security, but they're still dangerous." Carter nodded. "We knew they would regroup. We've only delayed them, not defeated them." Her thoughts shifted to the pulse they had just activated. Protocol Omega was a last resort weapon, one that had been designed not just to disable enemy fleets, but to give humanity a fighting chance when the worst possible odds were against them. It had worked, but she knew they needed more. The battle was far from won. "Activate Phase 2, Carter ordered. "We need to strike while they're regrouping." Ryan hesitated. "Phase 2, Commander. We're talking about—" "I know what Phase 2 involves, Lieutenant." Carter cut him off, her tone hardening. "We're not leaving anything to chance. This is a war for survival." The room fell silent as Ryan processed the order. Phase 2 was risky. It would use the remaining resources they had on the most destructive weapon they possessed, a planetary-scale railgun system hidden in Earth's core for centuries. Humanity's last line of defense had never been used, and for good reason. It was a weapon of unimaginable force, capable of devastating an entire fleet in one shot. But it came at a cost. The energy required to fire it would cripple Earth's own infrastructure for weeks, maybe months. But if it worked, the Arvok would be finished. Carter stepped away from the console, her fingers brushing against the cold metal as she watched the alien fleet reassemble on the screen. Their ships were preparing for something big, a final offensive, perhaps. She had no intention of letting them take the first move. "Phase 2 is online, Commander," Ryan said, his voice tense. "The railgun is locked onto the lead ship. We're just waiting for your command." Carter's mind flashed back to the countless times she had prepared for this moment. The war against the Arvok had been years in the making, each phase meticulously planned in secret. She had always known that humanity's power lay not just in brute strength, but in its ability to adapt, to surprise. The aliens had thought they had outsmarted Earth, but they hadn't accounted for one thing: humanity's refusal to stay down. "Fire," Carter said, her voice calm, yet filled with an unmistakable sense of finality. The ground beneath them trembled as the Earth's core erupted with energy. The massive railgun, a hidden weapon buried deep beneath the planet's surface, fired in an instant. The sound of the shot reverberated through the chamber, as though the very planet itself had fired a warning shot into the galaxy. A single, glowing streak of energy shot through space, faster than any weapon the Arvok had ever encountered. The beam tore through the darkness, its target locked with deadly precision. The alien ships, too focused on their own preparations, never saw it coming. The impact was nothing short of catastrophic. The lead Arvok ship, the flagship that had been the heart of their fleet, shattered in an explosion so massive it sent shockwaves through the space surrounding it. The energy released from the impact rippled outwards, destabilizing the remaining alien ships, throwing them into disarray. They had no time to react, no way to defend against a weapon of such magnitude. The Arvok fleet, once proud and mighty, was now in chaos. Their remaining vessels tried to flee, but it was too late. The momentum had shifted. Carter watched as the holographic display of the alien fleet began to crumble, their ships scattering in panic. They had been broken, their dominance shattered by humanity's hidden strength. Ryan let out a breath, his eyes wide as the scale of their victory began to sink in. "It worked, Commander. We've done it." But Carter remained still, her gaze fixed on the wreckage of the Arvok fleet. She couldn't afford to let her guard down. "Not yet," she said, her voice unwavering. "They're not finished." The alien ships were retreating, but it was only a matter of time before they regrouped again. Carter knew that the Arvok weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for their pride, for their very existence. If Earth had the will to strike back, the Arvok had the resolve to keep coming. As the alien fleet began to retreat into the darkness, Carter turned to face her team. "This is only the beginning," she said, her voice resolute. "We've won this battle, but the war is far from over. Prepare for their next move." Ryan nodded, his expression grim. "Yes, Commander." Carter turned back to the display, her mind already calculating the next phase of their plan. The war was far from won. The Arvok were fierce, and their anger would fuel them for the battles ahead. But for the first time in a long while, humanity had reminded the galaxy that Earth was not a planet to be ignored. It was a force to be reckoned with, and Earth would stand tall. No matter the cost, the sound of the retreating alien fleet was deafening in its silence. The last remnants of the Arvok armada scattered, like cockroaches fleeing from the light. The brilliant explosion of their flagship had left nothing but debris and a vast emptiness, but that emptiness was far from comforting. It was a signal, the beginning of a war Earth could not avoid, and now neither could the Arvok. Inside Earth's command center, the atmosphere was tense, charged with a mixture of triumph and dread. Commander Dahlia Carter had given the order to activate the railgun, Protocol Omega, and it had worked. The Arvok had been taken by surprise, their flagship annihilated in an instant. But as she stood there, watching the holographic display of the crippled alien fleet, Carter couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something worse than what they had just faced. "Phase 2 was a success," Lieutenant Ryan said. his voice a little quieter than before. "We've crippled their fleet, Commander. They won't be back anytime soon." Carter nodded, but her gaze never left the screen. The Arvok had retreated, but she knew better than to believe this was over. The aliens might have been broken, but their pride was unyielding. They would regroup, recalibrate, and come back. Earth had only bought itself a moment's respite. "They'll come again," Carter said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet certainty. "They've learned their lesson, but they won't stop." Ryan's eyes flicked to the screen. "Then what do we do, Commander? We've fired our best weapon. What more can we throw at them?" Carter turned to him, her expression hardening. "We prepare for the next wave. We've been underestimated for too long. Now it's our turn to show them what humanity is truly capable of." The room grew silent as Carter's words hung in the air. It was a challenge, not just to the Arvok, but to everyone who had ever doubted Earth's strength. She had led humanity through countless trials, and this battle was no different. The weaponry they had used was unprecedented, but there were still resources at their disposal. And with the alien fleet temporarily crippled, Earth had a chance to regroup and rebuild before the next assault came. Carter's thoughts were interrupted as a low chime rang through the command center. The screen flickered, and a new signal appeared. It wasn't from the Arvok, but from somewhere deeper in space. Something unfamiliar. "Another signal?" Ryan asked, his voice laced with suspicion. Carter's fingers hovered over the console. "No," she said quietly. "This isn't the Arvok." She quickly analyzed the incoming data. The signal was unlike anything they had intercepted before. It was encrypted in a way that made it nearly impossible to decode, but the patterns were too precise, too calculated to ignore. "Get me an analysis," Carter ordered, her voice sharp. "What is this?" Ryan quickly moved to his station, his fingers flying over the console as he tried to break through the encryption. It's alien," he muttered. "But not Arvok. This language, it's completely different." The signal grew stronger, its frequency increasing. Carter's heart raced as the realization hit her. The Arvok weren't the only threat. Something else was out there, something older perhaps, something even more dangerous. Humanity had awakened Protocol Omega to defeat the Arvok. But what if this new signal wasn't just a call from another enemy? What if it was a beacon for something much worse? "Can you pinpoint the source?" Carter asked, trying to steady her breath. Ryan nodded, his face pale. "I'm triangulating the signal now. It's coming from a sector just outside of Arvok space. But it's moving fast. We might not have much time." Carter's mind raced. They had already been blindsided by one alien force. She couldn't afford to let another one slip through their grasp. "Get me a fleet ready," she said. Now, as Ryan began coordinating with the fleet's commanders, Carter turned her attention to the larger picture. Earth had survived the Arvok, but this new signal could be the catalyst for something far greater than just a war. This could be the beginning of humanity's place in a much larger cosmic struggle, one that Earth had never prepared for. "Do we have any intel on this new enemy?" Ryan asked, his voice tight with anxiety. "Not yet," Carter replied, her voice steely. "But I'll be damned if we're caught off guard again. Get our best people on it. I want a full analysis by the time we launch." The tension in the room mounted as the clock ticked down. The Arvok had been the first wave, but the galaxy was far from secure. The unknown force on the other side of the signal was a reminder that Earth's survival was still in question. The true battle had only just begun. "We need to prepare for the worst," Carter said, her voice cutting through the room like a razor. "If this is the beginning of something bigger, we need to be ready. Every weapon, every resource, every ally we can find, we'll need it all." Ryan nodded, his face a mask of determination. "Understood, Commander." The holographic display flickered again, and the signal grew even stronger. There was no turning back now. Earth had made its mark by surviving the Arvok. But the galaxy was vast, and it held more dangers than they could imagine. The fight for survival was no longer just about Earth. It was about humanity's place in the cosmos. As Carter stood there, staring at the flickering display, a sense of clarity washed over her. The Arvok had been a test, a warm-up for what was to come. They had proven that Earth could strike back when cornered. But this new threat, it was unknown, uncharted, and far more dangerous than anything they had ever faced. "We will not let them take this world," Carter whispered to herself, her voice filled with an icy resolve. "We will fight until the very end." The signal from deep space pulsed again, louder this time, and as Carter looked at it, she understood. The message: this wasn't just a war for Earth, it was a war for humanity's future. And no matter the cost, Earth would rise to the challenge. The signal from the unknown enemy continued to pulse through the galaxy, reverberating like a beating heart, steady and relentless. Its source, still unidentified, was closing in. The Arvok may have been temporarily defeated, but the true battle was only beginning. Carter stood before the holographic display, her gaze fixed on the fluctuating patterns of the signal. Her mind raced. The unknown was always the most dangerous, and the pressure to act was growing by the second. They had to prepare, but the window was closing fast. "Commander," Ryan's voice broke through her thoughts, "the fleet is ready. We've assembled everything we've got. The new threat is within striking distance, but we need to know more about them before we engage." Carter didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned to face the control room, her eyes meeting each officer's. Their faces reflected the same uncertainty, the same quiet fear. It was a feeling she hadn't seen on them before, not since the Arvok had first made their move. Now, with an unknown enemy on the horizon, that fear was real. "Activate the probe," Carter finally said, her voice calm but filled with quiet urgency. "We need to know exactly what we're dealing with before we make a move." The probe had been designed to explore deep space anomalies, to chart uncharted territories, and to intercept hostile signals. Its speed was unmatched, and its stealth technology made it nearly impossible to detect. If this unknown enemy was truly as close as it seemed, the probe could reach them in a matter of hours. "Probe deployment in progress," Ryan confirmed, his fingers dancing over his console. "It's heading straight for the signal source now. We should have visual data in less than 2 hours." Carter nodded. 2 hours. They had no more time to waste. Earth had been caught by surprise once before, and she couldn't afford another misstep. Not this time. She turned back to the screen. The alien fleet, the remnants of the Arvok armada, were still retreating, their ships limping through space. Carter had ordered a full withdrawal, a strategy to preserve their strength, but the Arvok weren't finished. They would come back. She had no doubt about that. But this new enemy, this was something entirely different. Something that had already infiltrated the outer edges of Earth defenses without a single shot fired. They needed to strike first. The hours passed in tense silence. The officers at their stations worked furiously, monitoring the movement of the enemy and maintaining constant communication with the fleet commanders. Carter's mind never left the probe. Its success was their best chance at survival. But it was a gamble. And no gamble ever came without its risks. "Commander," Ryan called out, his voice tinged with anxiety. "We've got a problem. The probe is encountering resistance. It's not the Arvok, it's something else. Something we can't identify." Carter's heart skipped a beat. "Explain," she demanded, her mind flashing to all the worst-case scenarios. "What kind of resistance?" Ryan's fingers moved quickly over the console, trying to analyze the data. "The probe's communications are being jammed. It's being blocked by an unknown force. The signature is unlike anything we've seen before." Carter took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm. If this was a trap, it was already closing. "Can you break through the interference?" Ryan's face paled as the data continued to pour in, but he shook his head. "No, Commander, whatever this force is, it's shutting the probe down. We're losing contact with it." "How much longer until we regain control?" Carter asked, her voice laced with a thin edge of frustration. "We're working on it, but at this rate, it could be hours before we even get a signal back." Carter clenched, her jaw. Hours. The enemy was close, too close. Without a second thought, she turned to Lieutenant Morris, her eyes hard. "Prepare the fleet. We move now." Morris hesitated for only a moment before responding. "Yes, Commander. All ships are on." "Stand by." "We can't wait any longer for the probe to come back," Carter said, her voice resolute. "We're going to strike before they can fully assemble. I want the fleet in formation. We hit them hard and fast, while we still have the element of surprise." Her orders were clear, and the command center sprang into action. Officers moved quickly, their faces tight with determination. The time for hesitation had passed. It was now or never. The fleet moved into position, Earth's ships, all that remained, of humanity's fighting force, aligning in tight formation. It wasn't much compared to the vast alien armadas they had faced before, but it was all they had. Carter's eyes were locked on the fleet's movements, her mind running through 1,000 strategies, each more dangerous than the last. The enemy was just beyond the horizon, their presence growing stronger with every passing minute. Carter's instinct screamed at her to wait, to gather more information, but she couldn't afford that luxury. The unknown enemy had already shown its power by shutting down the probe. They had to strike first. "All ships are in position, Commander," Ryan called out. "Prepare to fire on my command," Carter ordered, her hand hovering over the console. She hesitated only for a fraction of a second before issuing the command that would set everything into motion. "Fire!" The first barrage of energy missiles ripped through space, streaking toward the enemy fleet with blinding speed. Earth's ships had the element of surprise, but how long would it last? The missiles collided with the enemy's outermost ships, the explosion visible from Earth's surface, the flash of light lighting up the black expanse of space. The enemy retaliated almost immediately, their ships opening fire with precision and deadly force. A massive shockwave rippled through space. As energy blasts collided with Earth's defenses, their power unmatched by anything humanity had faced before. The fleet rocked under the assault, but they held their ground. "They're not just reacting," Ryan said, his voice grim. "They're calculating. They're already adjusting their strategy. They're not like the Arvok." "Stay focused," Carter barked. "We hold the line. We've got them on the back foot. Keep pushing." The battle raged on, Earth's ships fighting with every ounce of strength they had. But as Carter watched, she realized something. The enemy was adapting faster than they could respond. Their weapons were more advanced, their tactics far more precise. This was no longer a battle of power. It was a battle of survival, and humanity was just beginning to understand the true scope of the war they had entered. The battle was far from over, but one thing was certain. Earth had just made its mark on the galaxy, and it wouldn't be forgotten. As the fleet engaged in the thick of the battle, Carter couldn't help but wonder how much longer they could hold out. This wasn't just a war for survival anymore. This was a war for the future, and humanity had only just begun to fight.